Stepmother framed me for theft to kick me out. I recorded her confession and now own their house. She's out. My name is Eric, I'm 26, and my life has always felt like a roller coaster. The kind where the highs and lows come at you so fast you barely catch your breath. But the true peak of absurdity, the point where everything tilted into full-blown chaos, came when my stepmother Linda, with her perpetual smile, sweet as candy but sharp as knives, decided it was time to pull the rug out from under me. Picture this: a cozy family evening, the kind that should be warm, even boring, suddenly taking a sharp left turn straight into drama. The kind fit for the best Mexican soap opera you could imagine. It was a regular Thursday night, or as regular as it ever got with Linda under the same roof. The scent of reheated lasagna filled the room, mingling with the soft, almost rhythmic rustle of my dad flipping the pages of his newspaper. He sat in his usual chair, brow furrowed with that serious expression he wore, as if the fate of the world rested on whatever headline he was dissecting. The dim glow of the lamp cast a warm circle of light around him, giving the illusion of peace. And then Linda entered, her smile stretched wider than a used car salesman's after closing a deal, her eyes twinkling with something that hinted at trouble. Her voice was syrupy sweet, but every word she said had the edge of a knife. "Darling, we need to have a talk about Eric's actions," she cooed, dropping the sentence as if it were the opening line of a well-rehearsed play. The room fell silent. My dad lowered the newspaper just enough to look over it, his gaze colder than an icy downpour. He set the paper down deliberately, the rustling echoing like a drum roll. I shifted uncomfortably, the knot in my stomach tightening as Linda turned her gaze on me, eyes narrowed, lips curving up like she'd already won. She had a gift for turning even the smallest accusation into a Shakespearean tragedy, and tonight, it seemed, I was the star of the show. "Eric, did you take money from the safe?" my dad asked, his voice even but strained, like he was forcing himself to keep calm. The question hung in the air, heavy, charged, and impossible to ignore. I blinked, my mouth going dry, half expecting someone to jump out with a hidden camera and shout, "You've been pranked!" But there was no laugh track, no punchline waiting to cut the tension. Just Linda, standing there with her triumphant smirk, eyes alight with a mix of anticipation and glee. My heart pounded in my chest, beating faster than if I'd downed 3 energy drinks back to back. "What are you talking about, Dad? I didn't touch your safe," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, though the lump in my throat felt like it had grown to the size of a grapefruit. The silence that followed was deafening, stretching longer than a minute ever should, as if time itself was holding its breath to see what would happen next. Dad wasn't in the mood to hear my explanations. The moment I opened my mouth, he raised a hand, cutting me off with a motion sharp enough to slice through steel. His eyes narrowed, fingers visibly trembling like he'd just downed a double espresso, and his face darkened, every wrinkle carved deeper with fury and disappointment. "Eric, you betrayed the family," he said, his voice heavy and ragged, as though the words themselves were strangling him. Each syllable struck me like a whip, searing my skin with the sting of accusation. It felt like a script pulled from the worst kind of melodrama, yet this was my life, playing out with brutal realism. The only audience, my father, already convinced of my guilt, and Linda, standing nearby with the serene air of a queen, savoring her victory from the shadows. The thudding of my heart was deafening, an uneven beat that pumped anger and hurt in equal measure, until they churned into something toxic, suffocating. My chest tightened, and every muscle in my body screamed to act out, to shout, to shatter the false tranquility of the room, to make him see beyond her thin, practiced smiles. But I knew better. The man who had once clapped proudly when I scored my first soccer goal, the dad who patched up my scraped knees and told me I could conquer the world, now looked at me like a criminal, a stranger who had breached the sanctity of his home. "Fine," I said, forcing the word through clenched teeth, fighting to keep the tremor out of my voice. I couldn't afford to let it break. Not now, not with Linda watching. Her thin smile deepened as I met her gaze, eyes glinting with cold triumph, as if to say, "Checkmate." Without another word, I turned and walked out, each step pounding like a war drum down the hallway, a final announcement of the collapse of any trust that had remained. The chill of the night hit me like a slap, biting into my skin, but even that sharp wind couldn't douse the fire raging in my chest. My fists clenched at my sides, nails digging into my palms hard enough to draw blood. I welcomed the sting. It was a distraction, a focus for the storm roaring inside me. I had no plan, no destination, just the raw, restless fury that clawed at my insides, ready to erupt. Linda thought she had won. She thought I'd walk away defeated, that her game was over. But oh, how wrong she was. This was war, and I was just getting started. Weeks later, I was crashing at my friend Mark's place, a guy who managed to turn chaos into a lifestyle. His room was a minefield of clothes, takeout boxes, and half-read philosophy books, all topped off with his trademark grin and phrases like, "Dude, life's just one big joke and we're all extras." Life was monotonous. A cycle of soul-sucking part-time jobs, trying to scrape by, and long nighttime walks with a cup of cold, watered-down coffee, because sleep had become more of an idea than an actual possibility. Everything seemed permanently gray, until one random evening when my life flipped on its head. I was sprawled out on Mark's worn-out couch, the fabric frayed and faded from years of use, scrolling through my phone out of sheer boredom. That's when I found it. An old voice recording I'd forgotten existed. My thumb hovered over the play button, curiosity sparking a momentary break in the numbing routine. And then I heard it. Linda's voice, dripping with that artificial sweetness, so sickly sweet it could pass for a spoonful of cough syrup. She was speaking into the phone, her tone laced with smug satisfaction. "You know, I set it up so perfectly. Now that boy won't stand in my way of taking full control." The sound of her friend's laughter, sharp, almost witch-like, echoed in the background, turning the moment into some twisted parody of a B-movie villain reveal. What the actual hell? I thought, the words firing through my brain like warning flares. The anger that had simmered and flared inside me over those weeks suddenly cooled, solidifying into something sharp, deliberate. This wasn't rage anymore. This was ice-cold resolve, a switch flipping in my head. Every word out of Linda's mouth played like a challenge, a taunt saying, "Catch me if you can." Well, if it was a game she wanted, she'd get one, and I was more than ready to be her worst nightmare. Sitting on that couch, the soft glow of Mark's half-busted lamp casting long shadows across the room, I pictured Linda at home, confidently sipping her expensive wine, convinced that her plan had gone off without a hitch. But no, sweetheart, the show was just beginning, and she had no idea who she was dealing with. I listened to that recording about 20 times, each replay chipping away any lingering doubt and replacing it with a cold, unyielding certainty. Linda's words looped through my head like a twisted melody, each note saturated with deceit, manipulation, and the smug satisfaction of someone who thought they'd won. But memories alone wouldn't be enough to expose her. I needed proof, something undeniable to end her game for good. It was time to set the stage for an unexpected show. Mark, ever the laid-back skeptic, watched me with one eyebrow raised as I installed a hidden camera in his cluttered room. "Dude, are you filming some cheap reality show or something?" he joked, shaking his head. I let a smirk tug at the corner of my mouth. "Trust me, you have no idea how epic this is going to be," I said, positioning the camera just right, concealing it among the mess so well that even the most seasoned detective would struggle to find it. The next day, I called Linda. My voice was measured, carefully neutral, just the right mix of conciliatory and tense, like I was someone seeking peace, not war. "Linda, we need to talk. I think we can handle this peacefully," I said, injecting a subtle bite into the last word. She agreed, of course, eager to play the part of the condescending victor, confident that I was still the naive fool she could manipulate. When she arrived, there was a smugness in her smile, a glint in her eye that suggested she was already rehearsing the lines to her "this is for the best" act. I played my part, offering a weak cocktail, just enough to relax her guard without dulling her edge. She took a sip, settling into her role with practiced ease. The words flowed from her like honey laced with poison, each one carefully chosen to paint herself as the misunderstood martyr. She wrung her hands and sighed at all the right moments. But then, in her pride, she let the mask slip. "You have no idea how much effort I put into convincing your father. He trusts me like holy water," she said, a sharp laugh escaping her lips, as though she'd told the punchline of a private joke. The arrogance in her tone was palpable, filling the room like smoke. I nodded along, letting her monologue stretch on, feeding her just enough reactions to keep her talking, while the camera quietly recorded every damning word. Finally, when she paused, satisfied that her twisted narrative had landed, I hit stop on the recording. The room went silent, the soft hum of traffic outside the only sound. I turned to face her, letting a slow, knowing smirk spread across my face. Linda's expression faltered, the confident gleam in her eyes dimming as realization sank in. Her smile vanished, her skin paling like a ghost caught in headlights. "Well, Linda," I said, the words hanging between us, sharp and cold. "Who's the main player now?" The recording in my hands was the key to reclaiming everything that had been taken from me. It was astonishing how pressing a single button could shift the balance of power so dramatically. I stood in front of my dad, my finger poised over the play button on my phone. "You need to hear this," I said, my voice devoid of warmth, steely with determination. He looked up at me, his eyes suddenly absent of the confidence that had once anchored our family. I pressed play. Linda's voice spilled into the room, dripping with that familiar sickly sweetness, the undertones as venomous as a snake bite. Each word was a dagger, aimed at the very foundation of trust my father had in her. The color drained from his face as if he were witnessing the unmasking of a ghost or a parade of long-buried lies. He sank slowly into the chair behind him, eyes glued to the floor, as though it might hold the answer to the unraveling truth. "Didn't you realize?" I snapped, the sarcasm in my voice cutting sharper than I intended. But he didn't respond. The legend of Saint Linda, the family's self-proclaimed savior, disintegrated before us, leaving only the bitter silence of betrayal. The next day, I sent a copy of the recording to our lawyer. That moment was like hitting restart after a brutal, seemingly unwinnable game. The lawyer's grin was the first genuine spark of hope I'd felt in weeks. "Eric, this is gold," he said, his eyes gleaming with the anticipation of what was to come. And in that instant, I felt like the protagonist of every childhood adventure movie, the one who finally stumbles upon the game-changing clue that turns the tide. The wheels of justice started to turn, slowly at first but gaining momentum with every passing hour. "Linda?" I could only imagine her reaction as the first whispers of consequences reached her ears. I hoped she was feeling the icy chill of what was to come, the dread creeping into her carefully constructed world as it started to crack and crumble around her. Court, where emotions meet the harsh light of reality. Today, I was ready for the show. Linda walked in with the face of a martyr, someone ready for public crucifixion. What a performance! Her eyes shimmered with tears so fake, even a kid would roll their eyes. "Your Honor, this is all a misunderstanding," she gasped, her voice trembling, as if she'd just survived an earthquake. The lawyers wasted no time playing the recording. The room filled with Linda's voice, bragging about her brilliant plan. I had to resist clapping. "Checkmate, Linda." The courtroom fell silent. My stepmother, who just moments before was playing the innocent, now sat pale as paper. The tears were finally real, but as useless as trying to douse a fire with a cup of water. The lawyers dissected her piece by piece. Lies, manipulation, every detail laid bare, like a classroom lesson. Linda tried to interrupt, defend herself, but each word grew weaker. "It's not how it seems!" she shrieked, but the judge's look could have frozen an ocean. "The court rules. Ownership of the house reverts to Eric," the judge's voice echoed. And there it was, the culmination, the moment that made the past few months worth it. Linda was ordered to leave the house within a week. Her face twisted in horror and helplessness, and for the first time, I felt the weight lift from my shoulders. If someone had come up to me then and said, "Dude, you look like you just won the lottery," I would have said, "You have no idea." After court, Linda walked out like a fallen drama queen, only without a crown or admirers. her proud posture now a hunched shadow of what it had been. She was left with nothing. No backing, no money, and none of her endless fake confidence. Justice, as they say, visited this circus. Dad tried to reach out. You know those calls where the phone is filled with heavy sighs before every word? "Eric, I was blind," he said, and in my head I added, and deaf, and probably even mute when it came to Linda. He kept saying he wanted to mend things, that he understood his mistakes, and while part of me wanted to say, "Too little, too late, Dad," another part felt a strange longing for the days before our home turned into a battlefield. Linda disappeared so quickly that I half wondered if her talent for manipulation had found new prey elsewhere. But no, even the rumors about her dried up, leaving only a bitter aftertaste. Dad didn't give up. He sent messages that tried to be both witty and heartfelt. "Remember building that model airplane? Seems like now I know I can't piece life back together like we did then." Ouch. But could one sentence erase months of betrayal? I stood at the crossroads. Leave the past behind or crack open that door I'd so carefully shut after the trial. The house was mine again. And you know what? It wasn't just nice. It was triumphant, like the first sip of cold soda after a scorching day. But this time, the walls didn't just keep out the wind or nosy neighbors. They were my trophy, my proof that I wasn't the guy who could be kicked to the curb by lies and manipulation anymore. I walked through the rooms, almost hearing old grudges evaporate with each open window. In my head, I played a victory tune to myself. "You did it, man. This is your fortress now." The wallpaper I once hated seemed less ugly, and the creaky floorboards suddenly sounded like music. Yes, this house was my sanctuary, and now it was just me and it. "Well, house, it's just you and me now. Let's make a deal. I won't plaster pizza posters in the living room, and you won't creak at night like a ghost choir," I said out loud, laughing at my own nonsense. But I didn't care. This was my house, and I knew I'd defend it at all costs. Whether Linda returned with her scheme 2.0 or some new rival showed up with stupid ambitions, I was ready. I knew now that I had a strength I hadn't even realized before. I was no longer the guy who allowed himself to be a victim.